If you thought Mark was stressed out from the back-to-back events of the Invincible War and Conquest invasion, wait until he finds out that he's been carrying the weight of superhero stories right now. Season 3 of Invincible has been a major step up from Season 2 in every way, and honestly, I'd put it on par with Season 1, and even there I'd say this season edges it out in certain areas. I'm very impressed with the character development, the plot progression and pacing, the increasing complexity of the themes, and the ever-growing stakes, both emotional and in terms of the survival of Mark, his family and friends, and the planet. And with Season 4 already confirmed and Amazon targeting a release for next year, they are definitely firing on all cylinders with this series. No more long gaps in between seasons, and if we get quality seasons like this every year, there may be a new king in the comic book space. Honestly, between this and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, animated superhero films are dominating. Even the greatest and most anticipated live-action superhero films these days are suffering from major delays. And that's when the movies aren't suffering from other problems like overpromising and underdelivering, lack of coordination, uninspired screenplays, and worst of all, being too formulaic and just passable. Invincible and the Spider-Verse films continue to break new ground in the comic book space and excite fans the way the MCU used to. And honestly, if any superhero project isn't on this level, they might as well keep it, because they're not going to be able to compete with this at all. The expectations couldn't be higher for Invincible Season 4, and they have definitely earned all the positive reception they've gotten off these last 2 episodes especially. Watching Mark try his best to be a good friend, a good boyfriend, a good son, a good brother, a good mentor, and a good hero has been an incredibly emotional and thrilling roller coaster ride. The prison break scene many of us were waiting for with Omni-Man, Alan the Alien, and the epic return of Battle Beast also did not disappoint. Even the quieter moments this season have been very enjoyable. From Mark training Oliver in how to be a hero, to Debbie trying to balance her new role as his mother and a girlfriend to Paul, to watching the blossoming romance between Rex and Ray, and even getting the background for a criminal couple earlier in this season, every episode has been satisfying. And of course, one of the highlights this season came from Mark versus Cecil, and this had a lot of people in the fanbase split. Some were siding with Mark, while others were siding with Cecil and claiming he did nothing wrong. I personally don't know how anyone watched their whole exchange and didn't come to the conclusion that they both need to work on their de-escalation skills, particularly Cecil. He's the leader of the Global Defense Agency. You'd think he'd be good at that sort of thing. And Mark's not off the hook either. I think this season taught him some very hard lessons about what it takes to make tough decisions when trying to save lives, particularly when you're not strong enough to get the outcomes you want through other means. The dynamic between Mark and Cecil continues to fascinate me, and I like how they come to have an understanding and a begrudging respect for each other by the end of the season. Cecil's backstory was also very well done here, and it drew even more parallels between him and Mark that made me appreciate his character all the more. I've always seen Cecil like Batman, willing to cross certain ethical and moral lines to keep powerful people in line. They don't have the luxury of morality like Mark or Superman because they view it as their inherent responsibility to save lives, view their contingencies as necessary in the grand scheme of things, and quite frankly, their intellect, resources, and foresight are the only things that can close the power gap between them and their potential enemies. I mean, just look at the events of the Invincible War. If Cecil hadn't developed those special measures against Viltrumites, namely Mark, he would have been killed by that alternate version of him. And speaking of the Invincible War, let's get into that epic 2-part finale. As someone who loosely follows what goes on in the comics, I was expecting some of what happened, but they adapted this brilliantly and made some masterful changes as well. Thankfully, I didn't remember everything because it's been a long time since I read the comics, but I did remember Rex dying during the Invincible War. And his fate was basically sealed when he told Ray he'd be back. Still, he had an emotional death scene, an incredible one too, went out with a literal bang as he turned himself into a bomb by supercharging his own skeleton. Rex's character development has been fascinating to watch, and this feels like the perfect ending to his arc. The show definitely won't be the same without him, and they picked one hell of a time to kill him off, right when it would pack the biggest emotional punch. It'll be cool to see a special dedicated to him, much like they did the one for Adam Eve a couple years ago. Since we're on the subject of Eve, we need to talk about one of the greatest girlfriends I've seen in comics because her devotion to Mark and their love for each other is beautiful, but scaring the hell out of me. I know they wouldn't kill off Eve, she's just too important of a character, but that doesn't mean I don't fear for her safety like all the others. I even get scared for Mark, and he's the main character. That's just how menacing the villains are in this series. She saves Mark's life multiple times during these 2 episodes and has a very impressive showing against Conquest. It's later revealed that she has mental blocks limiting access to her full power, which explains a lot of things if you ask me. I have no doubt that she's going to grow insanely more powerful over the next few seasons as she unlocks more and more of her power. And she's definitely going to need it because despite putting up an incredible fight, pulling out tricks we've never seen her use before, she nearly dies in this fight. And it's the trauma that allows her to tap into the power to save herself here. Eva's definitely going to be the MVP for a lot of fights going forward if she learns to fully master her powers. I also want to talk about Oliver because he's another character who puts up a decent fight for his age and has plenty of potential left untapped. No one frustrated me more this season than Oliver. It feels like whenever he was given specific instructions by Mark or Debbie, he intentionally did the opposite. And to be fair, he is still just a kid. However, this kid is supremely powerful. We tend to forget that since we've seen him as a baby and watched him grow up all season, that he's still a Viltrumite. And while there were a few moments that had me actually terrified for him during the Invincible War and Conquest's arrival, Oliver coming in when he's needed most and then bailing out if it gets too dangerous seems like a strategy that worked pretty well here. I can't wait to see how he continues to grow. He'll be an incredible asset by Mark's side, just like Eve once he reaches adulthood. And given his biology, that'll probably be very soon. I also like his developing morality, as Debbie, Mark, and Eve try to explain things to him as he gets older and is exposed to reality. And of course, we have to talk about that final battle between Mark and Conquest. I was expecting a lot of craziness, but even I wasn't prepared for what went down here. Conquest is a literal tank, a tank that won't stop talking, but a tank nonetheless. And Mark finally locks in this episode. I don't know if it's the special training he did with Cecil, or the fact that he's pissed off from the events of the Invincible War, but he has a much better showing against Conquest than against Anissa or Omni-Man. I actually felt kind of proud of Mark here. The only problem is I knew Conquest was much more powerful and was merely playing around. It's been a while since the fight with Omni-Man, so some of us may have somewhat forgotten how brutal a fight between two Viltrumites trying to kill each other can be. The entire planet becomes one big stage for collateral damage. Conquest is a much more fascinating villain than I expected him to be. The monologues, the heart-shaped kiss made out of blood that he makes when they're in outer space, to him admitting his loneliness to Mark when he believes he's about to kill him. That revelation to Mark was something else and elevated this fight to new levels. It works on multiple fronts because it provides more insight into Viltrumite culture, provides Conquest's backstory, and even makes you feel sorry for Conquest to a degree. It's almost as if the intimacy he gets with his victims before killing them is the only genuine connection he ever gets to experience, which is why he savors every bit of it during his fights. It's the only way he can express himself and probably the only thing that makes him feel alive. It adds such an interesting dynamic and way more depth to his character than I ever would have imagined they were going to give him. And the way Mark defeats him with those consecutive headbutts, it's straight out of the comics. Incredibly brutal stuff, especially when you consider both of his arms were broken and that resorted to him literally biting Conquest and ripping a chunk right out of him. I'm really concerned for Mark's mental health here at this point because he shouldn't have to keep going through this. By the end of the season, Mark is ready to kill to protect his home, which is a major shift from the beginning of the season. And honestly, I understand. And Cecil kind of pissed me off at the end of the episode by lying to Mark and keeping Conquest alive to question him about the Viltrumites. Like, I understand you need answers. You can probably run some tests on him and discover new weaknesses, or maybe even reprogram him to fight for your side. But this is a very dangerous idea that can easily backfire, and those restraints don't look too secure. Like, I bet Oliver could break out of those with some motivation if he wanted to. So I'm sure we'll see this decision come back to bite Cecil in the next season. But that does it for this video. Tell me, what did you guys think of this season of Invincible? I thought it was amazing. Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and as always, thank you for watching.